All right. So we are going to do some screen sharing and hope you guys are ready because we have a lot of great things to talk about today. So we're just going to briefly introduce ourselves and then we'll get ourselves started. So my name is Missy Frazin. I work in career services at UIC as Assistant Director of Career Development and Engagement. I've worked with young adults for a long time, college students, high school students, and I like working with people, helping them with their transitions. I think that could be kind of messy, but it's also really exciting to help people as they're figuring things out. I do have a master's degree in counseling, focused on college student development and school counseling. And again, glad to be here. I'm probably going to turn my camera off just because it's easier for me to kind of manipulate everything without the camera on, but I'll turn it on a little bit later. But again, thanks for being here. And I'm excited to have my other co-facilitator introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lauren Gallagher. I'm the Assistant Director of Career Development and Internships in the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences. My background is in clinical mental health counseling. So I love working with college students, and I also love working at UIC and being able to do all these different things. This is a really interesting topic. I think we like to come from it from the angle of like exploring expectations and then how do we advocate for ourselves when it comes to the negotiation process. So first off, Missy, do you want to kind of share our little disclaimer?
Yes. So this workshop is meant to be an introduction to how we form our expectations about salaries and then how to negotiate them. So you're going to learn things hopefully today. Maybe you'll be reminded of things you actually already know. But you are going to have to do some work on your own potentially to prepare yourself, to practice, to figure out what works best for you and how you're going to feel most comfortable negotiating salaries. And legitimately, we could have a whole day workshop, like a conference about negotiating salaries and expectations and where all that comes from. But we all are super busy, and we know you all are super busy. So we're trying to do something that's a little bit more compact. And we're going to be sharing a lot of great online articles and resources with you. I recently watched a YouTube video, and then we're going to provide the link for you from a professor at the Harvard Business School. And it was fascinating about salary negotiation. He is like a national expert in just negotiating in general, and he has some great tips. So you guys will also have access to his video. I've watched it like 4 times, and I learned something new every time I watch it because he has a lot to say. And also, we're not necessarily experts in this areas, but we also do have tips and advice, and we're excited to share them with all of you. But everyone is going to do this a little bit differently because we all have different experiences and things like that.
Thanks, Missy. All right, so we kind of structured today where we'll start off the first half talking about the expectations piece, how to be a critical consumer, how to really understand all of the content that's out there about salary negotiation and expectations and all of that. Then we have an amazing UIC LAS alum here who currently works in LAS to share a little bit about her story as a first-gen student and graduate, just kind of navigating that whole process. Then we'll share a little bit about how to respond to a job offer. We'll talk about racial and gender pay gaps in the US, and then we'll actually give you some tips and examples for how you can negotiate. So Missy and I kind of came together and we were like trying to kind of gather a sense of like what we hear from students. And oftentimes we hear the students will come to us and they say, okay, I want to get paid XYZ. Or they'll say, I need to make blah, blah, blah money. Or I want a major that will make me this much money. So I want you to think about where your idea about your desired salary comes from. So you can either use the QR code on the screen, or if you go to Slido, SLIDO.com, and then you can enter in the code, which is 2357565. I'll put it in the chat, 2357565. Oh, thanks, Missy.
No problem.
Oh, there's these. I just noticed Zoom chat updated. There's all these new features.
Oh boy, we're gonna have to explore that.
All right. I'll put it back up in a second. If you go to slido.com, looks like some of you have joined. All right. So where does this idea come from? We have my parents, my boyfriend, and friends. Ooh. Just market average, Glassdoor. Okay, some of you have done your research. Love it. TV shows, yes. People just like talking about income and things that we hear on websites, on TV. Public institution info. Yep, Missy.
Well, we had a vote in the chat for just like kind of Googling, like web searching.
Social media. Yes, we're going to incorporate lots of social media into our presentation. There's a lot of interesting information, good and bad, on social media. Anything else? Professor transparency. Yeah, so talking to your faculty about like what's realistic. Influencers, Silicon Valley, your peers, job descriptions. Cool, good. So we just kind of wanted to start off and just sort of gauge just where this information comes from, right? We always think it's so interesting when students say, I need to make this number. It's like, well, how did you come up with that number? So lots of different places that you're getting this information. Has anybody heard of Salary Transparent Street? I'm curious. They're all over TikTok, all over Instagram. Give me like a thumbs up in the chat or a reaction. Salary Transparent Street on Instagram or TikTok.
We have some no votes.
No. Sandra has. No? Good. Well, okay, cool. So they are a really cool account. They go to different cities across the nation and they just go up to people on the street and they ask them what do they do, how satisfied are they with their work, how much do they get paid, do they feel like they're being compensated fairly. And so it's all just like completely organic content. And so I want to share a few that I came across and I want us to sort of just have a discussion on what our thoughts are. So if you're not already following them, I would encourage you to. They're really great. So let's start with this one.
So I'm a therapist, social worker by trade. Yep. How much do you make? I make $95,000. Yeah. What's the best and worst parts of your job? The best is that I get to see people like heal and really take ownership of their healing journey. The worst part is that it's very heavy. So like I take on a lot of people's shit.
I'm a special ed teacher in Fairfax County.
Right now I'm just a student at George Mason, but I just got out of the military a while back. So.
How much do you make?
I think it's $67,000. Yeah.
The military was probably making like 40 to 50 a year, but now as a student I'm just utilizing GI Bill benefits, making about 25 a year. So.
And what's the best and worst part of your job?
Oh, gosh, the best is probably working with different kids every year. The worst is just having to do work outside of like my contract hours. So
just the stressors of the military. I mean, being a student now it's a lot easier, but yeah, now it's just the studying.
So there's one. I wanted to show you two from Instagram.
Of course, always want more because hospice pays very well.
Yep.
So there's a lot of room for growth too.
I make $52,000 a year.
Do you feel fairly compensated?
Yeah, it's like kind of based off education. So the more education I get, the more money I can make.
What kind of education do you have in?
Bachelor's degree in anthropology.
I also have a bachelor's degree in nursing.
What advice would you share with others who are interested in doing what you do, or just in general, what have you learned?
I would say for most nurses, they should try getting out of the hospital setting and see what other jobs there are, because there are a lot of different nursing jobs. and a lot of them will pay really well. And some of them have different schedules that are more flexible or better for your lifestyles.
How is your work-life balance?
It's really good. It's really great. Hospice is great. I build my own schedules.
I would say archaeology is changing and growing. There's a lot of room in the field, and so don't always listen to your professors that you're going to always be poor and never make money. If you want to do it, then do it. There's a lot of opportunity and room to do what you want.
I'm a hospice nurse.
I'm an archaeologist.
Okay.
Psychiatrists, psychologists, and the whole treatment team to be able to help people who don't speak English.
How long did you do it total?
I did it for 15 years.
Wow. Mind sharing how much you made before you retired?
When I started my job, I was hired with $35,000 and I ended with $42,000 or $43,000.
After 15 years?
Yes, I think it was stopped during that time where the state didn't give any raises. So it was just one of those things, but I really enjoy what I did, and I was very happy doing it, helping the less privileged and mentally ill people.
Do you feel like you were fairly paid for what you did?
You know, we always feel like we can get paid more, but I manage.
So you like what you did overall?
Yes, that's probably the more important thing I really enjoy, and I work with very interesting people, really good professionals. It was my biggest motivation to go and work that way.
Is there anything that you learned that you would like to share with maybe a younger generation just starting their careers?
Before I work in different fields, in the last 15 years of my life, I work in a mental hospital, and that really kind of opened my eyes very much about serving your community, not thinking about money, but just to do something better for somebody who is less privileged than you, and going to work there every day and make me appreciate very much how lucky I was. I work in a psychiatric hospital. I was in charge.
So I'm curious, I played 3 different videos from Salary Transparency. What are some things that you noticed, thoughts, reactions? Feel free to unmute or type it in the chat. I'm curious to know your just initial thoughts or reactions. Okay, so no one was more than 100,000. Surprised at some of the salaries. Pay raise is possible only if we are able to negotiate properly. Okay, other things? Anything else you noticed? Yeah, right. It was like really real, raw, honest. Really like that everyone enjoyed what they were doing. Maybe if it was lower pay, trust your professor. The importance of maybe like exploring different environments, maybe changing jobs. Some enjoyed their jobs, others just got by. So one thing to keep in mind is that you really need to be able to assess the information, right, that you're receiving. So each of those videos were from very different parts of the nation, right? And I was even seeing in some of the comments that depending, like someone was like, oh, 76,000, that's low for being in California, it's a lot higher, right? Like location is really going to depend or make an impact on your salary. I think also education has a big impact, right? So for example, that therapist who said that she was making $95,000 a year, right? She didn't just graduate making that money, right? Is she working in private practice? We don't know how many hours a week she's working. We don't know what other like certifications and things that she has. And so it's important to really look at it from a full picture, right? Just hearing somebody's salary doesn't automatically mean, oh, that's what we're going to be making, right? And we'll talk a little bit later today about really how to research and assess those things and how to advocate for ourselves based on the experience, the skills, the qualifications that we have. So there's a lot on social media. Again, some really good tips and tricks, but also making sure that you're being critical of the content that you're hearing. Anybody else have any thoughts or questions about that? I want to introduce Sandra to come in and kind of share your experience, just sort of like starting off a little bit about like what you studied, how you navigated things at UIC, and then how like salary expectations played a role for you in terms of like choosing your major, choosing careers, family pressures, all of that.
Thank you, Lauren. So hi everyone, my name is Sandra Lopez. I'm one of the recruiters for the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences now. But I actually started my journey off at UIC as a transfer student. I came into UIC thinking that I was going to be a doctor, because honestly, like that's what my parents were hoping for me. And at the time, I just didn't really think that there was any other way to get a career with like a high salary or like a salary. I didn't even really know, I guess, like what salary to kind of like expect when I graduated. But I thought, hey, like if I'm a doctor, I know it's going to be some big bucks. So then I ended up eventually changing my major, after I realized that I was only really, studying biology because it was something that my family really wanted for me. And Lauren and Missy both really helped me in terms of, communicating with my parents and getting that conversation of, hey, I'm actually changing my major to something else and I'm changing it to Spanish. And I guess I was so scared to tell my parents just because of the fact that I was scared that they were going to say like, oh, Spanish, like what kind of money are you going to be bringing in with Spanish? And at the time, my parents my parents are landscapers. And so there was no one in my family really who I could really go to in terms of like, hey, like when you get your degree, like what is the salary that you should be asking for? And so it was kind of difficult just like navigating that alone. But then eventually I realized, like I still have Missy and Lauren. So I came back to the career services office, met with Missy. And I think it was really helpful to also talk to them about the fact that, hey, like if once I do graduate, like what are the types of ranges that I could expect? Because I didn't really know at all. I eventually ended up getting a job at the Illinois Student Assistance Commission, which is ISAC, and they help students complete their FAFSAs. But even in that job, I just didn't even know, like, I guess, like what my I didn't know the expectations for my job in terms of like hours and also like how that really correlated to my salary. And then that's what kind of made me realize that, hey, like, even during like the interview process, I also have to ask like, how many hours am I expected to be available to people and to students? And so I ended up finding out that like, hey, like when you have a job like that, like you're actually going to be available or you're going to be expected to be available outside of your working hours. And I remember like at one point I was just helping a student complete their FAFSA while because like we had like a work phone. And so it was like at random times. And it was all because, to make sure make sure that they meet the deadline for like submission and whatnot. And because of the fact that I know how much I heavily relied on it, I think it, I was adamant of like, okay, well, if they need me, I guess they need me. Lauren, could you put my slide up? I feel like I'm forgetting some things too. Thank you so much. Oh yes, and so then yeah, definitely, like I said, and so because of the fact that my parents were landscapers at the time, they really needed like my support as well in terms of one, making sure that I could also help them in terms of work, but also helping them financially as well. So like sometimes like there'd be times where like I would have to like during my college experience, I would be like working 3 jobs and doing an internship. And I think my internship definitely helped me a lot just because of the fact that it really connected me with the actual environment that I wanted to be at that I didn't even realize I could be in with a bachelor's degree in Spanish. But yeah, that also helped me in terms of like realizing like, hey, like if I'm going to be helping out my family, I also need to be, taking into consideration the type of salary that I should be expecting. And so then after working that job, found out that like, it wasn't for me. I'd rather work at UIC just because at the time, I think that I realized that, I wanted to also go back to school. And I think UIC also really helped me. But yeah, there was a really big pressure on like from my family side in terms of like, them wanting to see me eventually, financially help them in terms of retirement as well. So at the back of my mind, that's always been like a pressure and something that I've been having to take into consideration when applying to jobs, because, got to make sure that income would be able to like be balanced not only between me and like everything that I need, but also like having enough that I would have extra to be able to provide some sort of like finance for like my family as well.
Okay, great, Sandra. Thank you for sharing. I think one thing that I think Sandra really touched on that I think we're going to talk a little bit about today is like, yes, your salary is an important part of like your benefits package, right, of the offer. But then for Sandra, she's going to get her master's degree at UIC, and because she's UIC full-time employee, she qualifies for a tuition waiver, which sort of basically helps her to pay for it. So I just think sometimes we always focus on like that actual number, but if you factor in things like health insurance or like a tuition benefit, I mean, sometimes your offer could almost be doubled depending on what else is in that package. So I think that's sort of a good example, even though she maybe didn't realize it, of all the different things in a package. So, and Sandra, when you were like potentially going to work at UIC, that was something that you were considering as part of the package because you knew you wanted to go to grad school?
Yeah, definitely. I knew I wanted to go to grad school, and in my mind, I also knew that, through that job that I had previously, they offered a tuition waiver as well. And so my first question was also like, what other places are going to offer this sort of benefit as well? And also the insurance, because I realized that the last job that I had, that was actually very important and very helpful to like have insurance and like, not have to pay like crazy prices to go visit a doctor. And then another thing I also forgot to mention was even like when I was like looking at like the benefits that I was going to also be getting is my first question was also like, hey, like how many vacation days like would I even get? And I forgot to even ask like, how do I acquire those? Because depending on the job that you have, there is like a way, there's certain requirements that you have to fulfill on your end to be able to use and add up those vacation days as well. Which is very helpful, and sick days.
No, that's a great point. And thank you so much for sharing your experience, because I'm sure there's a lot of students and alumni that can relate to being a first generation student and like juggling a job, multiple jobs, an internship, and also trying to help financially with your family. Like there's a lot to think about. It sounds like and also the idea of switching your major and switching your career path and those kinds of things. So thank you for sharing and joining us. It's really great to have you.
Missy, I also wanted to mention something, like Sandra, when you initially like were like, I'm just gonna be a doctor because I know I'm gonna make a lot of money, right? Like, I think, our understanding of salary shifts, right? For you realize, wow, there's a lot more that goes into it, but also thinking realistically about what that number means, right? And like, oh, if I'm making 40 something, 50 something, 60, what is that going to look like in terms of like what I'm able to save, or what other things do I need to like let go of? And I know something for you is like, you're never going to let go of your coffee. That is something that's extremely important to you, and that is okay, right? So how are you making adjustments in other ways? And so, right, like I think it's really important to really think critically about what salary is, what that means, and what does that actually break down? What does that look like, right? We don't have to be making over 6 figures to live in Chicago, right? Like we can do that with less. And so thinking about like, what does that actually mean? But I was just curious if anybody hearing from Sandra, from her story, if there was any thoughts, questions, things that like burning things that you wanted to chat with Sandra about.
I would just like to thank you. I'd really appreciate like the vulnerability and like talking about having to look at salaries and also consider your family. I feel like I don't see a lot of conversations about that, or maybe even just within my own circle. So, some people have that privilege of just the salary is for me and that's kind of it, just to support myself and my needs and my budget. But some of us, have a wider breadth of a wider circle to support. So I appreciate you mentioning that.
Of course. Happy to. Yeah, definitely very important to consider all the things that you need to buy and want to buy, and like really distinguishing like what things are you not wanting to be flexible on. Um, that's something I learned the hard way.
Thank you, Sandra. All right, Missy, I'm gonna share my screen so that you can give us some tips for actually
Perfect.
responding to the offer.
And just one like last piece, kind of related to what Sandra was talking about, as far as like she was thinking she was gonna become a doctor, her family was really focused on that. And I think sometimes we also fail to realize like you potentially a lot of people are taking out a lot of loans potentially to become a doctor. Not that you shouldn't become a doctor, but I think sometimes we think sort of like certain careers are sort of like a get rich quick scheme, but then also there's a lot of other factors that are part of that. I have a neighbor who's a doctor, and I was telling him, oh, I have a lot of students that want to become doctors. And he's like, oh, that's great. He's like, why is that? I'm like, well, they're just in healthcare. They want to help people. And, sometimes people think that it's a quick way to get rich. And he started laughing. He's like, oh, tell them they should go do something else. He's like, I have a lot of money in loans that I've taken out. So, right, there's just like Lauren said, there's different kind of trade-offs, of course, depending on the career and things like that. So we are going to talk about negotiating salary, but I just want to give some tips about responding to job offers, because I think that sometimes things are very simple about how you respond to a job offer, but also if you don't do some of these things, I think sometimes that, unfortunately, that job offer can get rescinded, right? So you need to respond quickly, generally within one business day if possible. You don't have to accept the offer, but you want to acknowledge it. Oh my, thank you so much for this really wonderful opportunity. I'm really excited about the offer. I would like to review everything and wanted to check in about like how much time I would have to do that or things like that. Like you don't have to accept the offer. And we also don't recommend accepting it on the spot. Always, I would say, ask for a few days. You could ask them how much time can I have, or when you can say, I think I need a few days. I think I may need a week to review everything. And also make sure you get it in writing. It's great if somebody verbally calls you. A lot of places maybe will call you to offer, which is wonderful. But thank you so much for this information. I'm really excited to review everything. Thank you again for the opportunity. Can you please send me everything in writing just so I can review it and just make sure that, if I have questions, I know how to reach out or, things like that. So I would never accept anything on the spot. Even when I used to hire student employees in my previous institution, I told students, please think about it. I would like to hear back from you in a couple of days. I do not want you to respond on the spot. Like, even if they kind of pressure you, this is so exciting. Thank you so much. I do need some time to think about it, etc. And the other thing is that if you have questions about the offer, like potentially you want to negotiate, or you have other questions about other parts of the package, you should follow up and ask those questions. So for me, I've had an experience where I was offered a position. I was very excited. And I had some very specific questions about the healthcare package. And they did send me some like general information, but I had, again, specific questions about it, sort of a certain kind of healthcare coverage. And so I followed up and said, this is really exciting. I see you've given me 2 days to consider the offer. I do think I may need a few more days. I have some questions about the healthcare. And they said, okay, we understand, how about a week? I said, a week is great. And then I said, is there someone I can talk to at your organization so I can ask my more specific questions? It turns out it's kind of a smaller organization. They kind of outsource some of the healthcare to a consultancy company, but they said, yeah, well, we'll put you in touch with that company. They know a lot about our healthcare. They can answer your questions. Super helpful. This woman like jumped on the phone with me. I had a bunch of questions prepared. She sent me additional information. Like I had gotten some information from the company, but she sent me more specifics related to what I was asking about. And it was really helpful. And what I figured out is that after reviewing everything, that the healthcare that I was getting at my current position was just much more comprehensive. And so I ended up turning down the offer. Unfortunately, however, I did it in a really respectful way. And I thanked them a whole bunch. I didn't just send them an email. I jumped on a Zoom and explained to the person who had given me the offer how I was so excited about it. But, for my needs at that time, unfortunately, I wasn't able to accept it. And she was like, hey, can we like still connect? Can we still connect on LinkedIn? I'd love to continue talking with you, blah, blah, blah. I said, of course. Right. So how you respond, whether you're accepting or not, right? Accepting is really very important. It's how you do all of these things and being likable, and understanding that they have constraints too. Like I could have asked for 3 weeks, right? But that's not going to work for them. So you want to be reasonable, but also try to check in with them about what they need. So it's okay to ask questions, and you can jump on the phone with someone, you can ask for more information. It's not just like they send you everything and then you have to look it over and then you have to make up your mind. Absolutely can ask questions, and you should ask questions if you don't fully understand the actual offer. Okay, so we are now going to move on. Just a couple of things for you to know. There's a newer law that I find that a lot of people don't know about, but it's really important. And so in the state of Illinois, if you're going to work in Illinois, there's something called the No Salary History Law, passed in September of 2019. And employers cannot ask applicants about prior wages, both hourly and salary. And you also cannot be discriminated against if you refuse to answer that question in interviews. And technically, like any of us can report employers to the state of Illinois, and I have the information, because they can be fined. They also cannot contact your previous employer to ask about how much they were paying you. And sometimes I know in online applications, sometimes there's like a place to put in prior salary. You can leave it blank, you can put all zeros in. If you get asked in an interview, right, you can choose to answer it if you want to, but it's also okay to say, unfortunately, I actually can't answer that question, and I'm not sure if there's actually a newer law in the state that the applicants don't actually have to answer that question, and so this time I'm just not comfortable answering that question. And yes, like that might give them pause, right, that you're refusing to answer, but also it's the law, and it's been the law, for a few years now, even though not everyone is familiar with it, and so you don't have to answer that question. So that's obviously up to you how to handle it, but just something for you to think about. Other states have different rules, but the state of Illinois, this is what the law is. And I think we're fortunate to live in a state that, has that protection. So, a big part of why we wanted to facilitate this workshop is because, unfortunately, and some of you may have heard about this, is that there is a gender and a racial pay gap in this country. And unfortunately, it's most pronounced for women and people of color. And so people of color often are doing the same work, but then when someone is a white man who does it, they're actually getting paid less for the same exact work. And so it's just something to think about, and I think something to consider. And what's also very interesting and unfortunately true is that it starts early. So it starts as we begin our careers. And so it's something to be aware of. And this is, of course, why we want to encourage people to negotiate. And there's a really wonderful resource from the American Association of University Women. You do not have to be a woman or whatever, but you can access it for free. And they have a very detailed free online salary negotiation class that you can do on your own time. And that is extremely detailed. So it's longer than an hour, right? Like this is obviously a shorter workshop, but they have some good resources that we recommend, but just something to consider. And this is why negotiating and advocating, for yourself is really important. How do you answer the salary range question? Yes. So we are actually going to get to that. Okay, wonderful. So I think we want to know just a little bit about how you feel about negotiating salary, because it sounds like we already have good questions, but I think for some people this can bring up a lot of different feelings. So how do you feel? And Lauren, I think this is you, so I'm sorry.
Very good.
We're getting our Slido ready to roll.
The same thing, you can go to slido.com, enter in that same code, or use the QR code on the screen. But curious how we all feel about this whole salary negotiation process. Yeah, you hate it, makes you feel very uncomfortable, sad, okay. Complicated. Scared, especially about being rejected, difficult, uncomfortable. Anxious. You don't want to be lowballing yourself, unsure if you deserve a higher salary. Happy, nervous, intimidated. Okay, interesting. So it sounds like a lot of us have some of these similar thoughts and feelings when we think about this process, right? It's hard enough going through the whole job application process, getting through the interview, and then feeling like you really need to evaluate your worth and be able to negotiate that in a way that is beneficial. Oh, terrible.
The only thing that I'll point out, just like really briefly, is I hear all that because I think negotiation makes a lot of people uncomfortable. But the only other thing I'll say is that, man, if you're negotiating your salary, you know what that means? You got a job offer, right? And they like you and they want to hire you. So yes, a negotiation can make us feel kind of sticky, but I think also it's good to celebrate that you have an offer. And you probably, like Lauren said, you probably worked very hard to get to that point in that process. So just something to also celebrate, even though you may feel anxious about it as well.
And I think too, right? Like it's part of the process. Employers expect this to happen, right? You're not like throwing them a curveball. You're not like, doing this weird new thing. Like it's part of the process. It's expected. And so, as uncomfortable as it might be, it's something that the employers know that's a part of the process, right? So when you think about your salary offer, think about like, there's some negotiation already built into that, right? Because it is the expectation that candidates will negotiate. So if you don't ask to negotiate, then you're not going to receive anything, right? And really how you ask to negotiate really matters. We're going to share some ways to do that, some ways not to do that. But I thought this was interesting. According to salary.com, 82% of employers surveyed said that they are not upset when job seekers negotiate during the interview process. That's a huge majority of employers, right? And so we want to encourage you to shift your mindset and how you're thinking about negotiation, right? Try to see it more as a collaboration, not a conflict, right? You don't have to go in hot and be ready to fight. You're thinking of it as a conversation, right? A way to collaborate, a way to kind of like mutually agree on a great number. So we got a question, right, about providing a salary range, and the range is about a $10,000 to $15,000 range. And I want to make sure that we're answering the question. Okay, so hard to put what you think your value is, even if, especially if you're really excited about the job, yes, even if like you've done all of your research, right? So one thing to think about is making sure that you are going to be satisfied with any number within that range, right? And so when you are when you're researching market value, and Missy's going to share some amazing resources for how you can start to like pinpoint that range, but make sure that if they give you the very low end of that number, you're going to be okay with that, right? Because you're the one that provided that as sort of a base. The other thing, sometimes you'll be asked for that range at the very beginning. If you are working with a recruiter might ask just to make sure that you're not wasting anybody's time, right? So when you are starting this application process, really, we want to encourage you to do your research ahead of time and be prepared to talk about your range at any point in the interview process. And so, Missy, I want you to share the tools for researching. That way, students, you can feel more confident with the range that you're building, but also we want you all to take into account your education, the things that you've been doing as a part of being a student at UIC, all your course projects, all the things that you have put into the degree, in addition to your work experience and your internships and your volunteer work, like all of that counts. And so I would also want to strongly encourage you to meet with us. Sandra mentioned earlier, she utilized the LAS Career Development Office, she utilized Career Services, she practiced, she did everything, right? Because sometimes we don't, it's like awkward to like talk about ourselves, it's awkward to evaluate our experience. And sometimes we need somebody else to help us to see that, right? We need somebody to be like, oh my gosh, you started your own like Instagram business? that counts as experience. That's great. Or, wow, you have like this, your own nonprofit, or you've been volunteering here for 3 years. Like all of that counts. And so sometimes having a conversation with somebody can help you to see all of those valuable experiences and all the transferable skills that you've built over the last few years. But Missy, do you want to share
Yeah, let me just say a couple quick things about this, and then then I'll have you stop
Mhm.
sharing, and then I'll share so we can look at pay scale. But definitely research, like, and by research, it's not like go talk to your mom or your auntie or like your best friend. Like, we're going to show you some credible sources that we suggest that you use to research, like the position, your industry, the location, right? Like pay in Chicago is very different from pay in Los Angeles because the cost of living, while high in Chicago, is extremely high in Los Angeles or other parts of California, right? So you want to kind of do some like local research. And then the other piece, and I think that people neglect this a lot, is the networking piece can be huge. Like if, let's say there's 2 or 3 employers or 4 or 5 employers you're really excited about, you hope to work for. I think it's important to reach out to people at those organizations, do some informational interviews just about their experience in that organization, what they're liking about it. But also you can ask them like, hey, I'm really excited about, hopefully I'm hoping to maybe work here. I'm just curious about a little bit about like salary packages or benefits or how that would work. I don't think that should be your first question when you're reaching out to someone for an informational interview to chat, but something you can kind of loop in. You can even ask like, what's your understanding of how like negotiations work? Is that something that, people do here? Did you negotiate, your package? Like you can ask people. If people aren't comfortable answering, they'll just tell you they're not comfortable. But I just think talking to people in your network about salaries for the kinds of positions you're looking at can be so helpful. In addition to obviously some of the resources we're going to show you too. So I just think the networking piece gets neglected, but you absolutely can ask people in your network some of those questions. Okay, Lawrence, I'm going to have you stop sharing. Thank you. And then I'm going to, let's see if, oh boy, 1 second. I have something up and I think that's not going to be helpful. So let's try to share once more. All right, here we go. Sorry, my computer has a mind of its own. Here we go. Hopefully you guys can see that. So this is payscale.com. And the deal is that I've never used it. I like it a lot. Oops. Oh boy. Okay, I like it a lot. However, you do have to make a login and password, which it takes a while. It probably took me like 15-20 minutes initially, but it's so worth it. Because I basically had a fake offer. Well, I had an offer and I put it as a financial analyst, and you have to put in like, do you get a bonus? Like, what kind of benefits are you getting? So it took me a while, but it was worth it just because, and I'll show you it'll show you kind of you compared to the market. And it'll tell you kind of like, other people what might be making. Again, I put a bonus in it. Of course, I sort of made it up, but it'll show you like over time how this might work. It'll also show you like based on experience, gender level. There's a lot of good information. And unfortunately, you can see that there still is a gender pay gap, although it's definitely narrowing. Cost of living, like there's a lot of good information in here, and it's free to make a PayScale account. So I absolutely recommend it, but just know it's not like a 3-second kind of Google thing. Like it's going to take you a little bit of time. It'll also even tell you like skills that, impact pay. I loved this too. If you click on this, it talked to me about like, maybe I need additional education. Like there's just a lot of good information here. Again, it's free. They may have maybe they have an account that is paid, but I just did the free piece. And so I really recommend something like PayScale or Glassdoor. I like PayScale the best because I think they really seem like they're pulling out a lot of good information. But it's worth it to make an account. And then even you also can do it. There's something you can do in PayScale where you don't have an offer, but you're trying to like get a sense, right, of what's going on in the field. So you can do that too. So that's a good resource. Talking to people in your network, I think, is a good resource too. But sometimes I just find that people will tell me, oh, like my mom said it, or like my best friend said that like so-and-so pays blah, blah, blah. And I was like, okay, do we have that in writing? How do we know that? Was that this year? Was that last year? Also, what else is in that package? So PayScale, I think, is a really good source of information. And again, I made a free account and was kind of messing around with it, and I will use it, right? Instead of my own professional journey. I think it's that good of a resource. So Laura, do you want to, okay, perfect. So now we're going to get into a little bit more about some of the kind of the nitty-gritty of negotiating. So it does happen sometimes early in the process, like Lauren said. Sometimes employers will ask candidates about salary in the first interview. I would say that's becoming more common. And I think it happens often when you're talking to the person from human resources or the recruiter versus the hiring manager. The hiring manager is generally the person you're going to potentially be your boss. But so what do you guys think about that? We can use the chat. Like, what are the reasons that you think it's becoming more common for employers to ask in that first interview about salary? What do you all think about that? Because I would say like maybe 5 or 10 years ago, like I was like, did not happen in the first interview. It's becoming a lot more common, I would say, for it happen in very like kind of early on, can quickly reduce pool of applicants. I mean, James, I think that that's true, but I would also say, right, they don't want to waste your time. They don't want to waste their time either. So I think it's just trying to make sure, is this a, can we, are we going to have something we can meet in the middle on, get a level of expertise, pay discrepancy is too high, it's a waste of time. Absolutely. So, yeah. And I mean, to potentially screen reduce pool of applicants, I mean, potentially, but also like you could be a top applicant. I always tell students when they're interviewing, you could be, I don't know if you like basketball, but you could be Steph Curry in the interview process, or potentially somebody else is Steph Curry. So it's not always they're trying to reduce, they're trying to see like, man, you're like one of their top applicants. They're trying to see, man, can we pay this person what they're looking for? So, right. So all the reasons that you guys said, but again, like 10 years ago, like maybe not never, it was unusual to happen in that first interview. So just like to think about. And then also, I think a lot of times they may ask you for your desired range in that first interview. And we encourage you, if you can, to try to get the employer to name the range first. And I know that could feel a little uncomfortable. So we have some tips about like how to do that. So this is just like, again, you put this in your own words, whatever you feel comfortable with, but something like, it's very early in the process. I'm still learning about responsibilities and, the position. So my expectations are flexible at the moment. Plus for me, I consider a lot of things in the kind of the benefit or the offer, not just the salary. So something like that, again, you could change it. And then you can say, I'd love to hear more about like what you have budgeted for the role, right? Or what's the salary range for this position, or what's the salary, for people in similar positions at the organization. But you also need to be prepared that they may ask you to name that range. And like Lauren said, you have to be really thoughtful about this, because if you tell them 50 to 60 and then they offer you 50, like you can't be mad because you said 50. Like you can't be like 50 to 60, so I hope they pick 55. If you say 50 to 60, they could pick 58, they could pick 55, they could pick 50. So these are just some suggestions about how to see if you can get the employer to name that first. And sometimes people don't actually realize you can actually negotiate other aspects of the hiring package, potentially, but it depends on the position and the industry. Like, for example, public school teachers, at least in the state of Illinois, for the most part, but not everywhere, a lot of times you're unionized. Like I have a unionized position. So like when you have a unionized position, potentially you usually can't negotiate because it's part of the contract that you are kind of signing in a sense, right? So it depends. Some industries, like you 100% can negotiate. But so just because we're talking about these things, it really depends on where you're potentially going to work. So the other thing you can try to negotiate on things would be like, hybrid, remote, in person. If you want to go to conferences, money for like professional development, work hours. I know somebody who worked at a place that I was shocked that she could negotiate this, but she negotiated her work hours and they were not the same as anyone else. I was like, how did you get that? And she's like, well, when they gave me the offer, there were some things that I was looking for they couldn't give to me. But so I said, one thing that's really a priority for me is my work hours. And I would like to work 7:30 to 3:30. And they made that change for her while they couldn't move on other things. Tuition reimbursement, maybe loan repayment, retirement contributions, if there's a signing bonus, again, depends on the field. Some fields that's very common, some fields they never do that. Are you moving? Start date is absolutely something you can try to negotiate. Let's say they want you to start in 2 weeks and you're like, I want to go on vacation, I want to start in 4 weeks. So you definitely could try to negotiate that, or maybe extend it a little bit. Potentially vacation days, elder care, childcare, health insurance, stock options, or equity in the company. But again, it depends. And I think what's so important is when you get an offer, you really have to think about, and hopefully you've done this before an offer, what are your priorities? I already explained to you that at different times in my life, healthcare has been my number one priority, and even in some cases more for me, more important than salary, right? Because healthcare can also be really expensive. For some people, the biggest priority is, can they work remotely or can they work hybrid? For some people, the biggest priority is tuition reimbursement or loan repayment. And so you have to really think about what are your, I would say, like maybe top 2 or 3, maybe 4, because the other thing is when you're negotiating, it's not great, I don't think, for you to negotiate on 8 different parts of the package. Like you have to pick, like, what are the 2 or 3 things you really want potentially to move on, and then focus your negotiations on that versus being like, well, I don't like this, and I don't like this, and I don't like this, and I don't like this. Again, you want to be likable, you want to be respectful as you're negotiating, so you have to prioritize what's most important to you. And as you go through your life, your priorities may change. For some people, salary maybe is super important. For other people, it's something else. So that's just something to think about. And the other thing I would say is, if you're trying to negotiate about like I said, tuition or whatever, let's say, you could say, this is a wonderful package. Thank you so much for this offer. I would like to know what parts of the package are negotiable. Can you please let me know that? And, or you can just say, let's say you try to negotiate something and they say like, unfortunately, we can't do that. It's okay to say, can you help me understand why that would be difficult to do? Has any experiences in this company where you have been able to negotiate about that? Or again, what part of the offer is negotiable? So again, can you help me understand is like a good way to start out if they're saying no to something. And the other thing I would say is that sometimes they say no to something sort of initially, right? But a no today isn't necessarily a no in 6 months. So let's say I don't know, you're looking for like a bonus or something, and they say, unfortunately, we can't do that. I think you could say, well, thank you for letting me know that. Would it be possible in 6 months to revisit that? I would like to, potentially write that in my contract, or is there a way to write that in, just so I understand it's not possible today, but I'm wondering if that's something we could kind of check in about in 6 months or in a year during my performance review or whatever it is. Again, they can say no, but if you don't ask, they absolutely are going to say no. Okay. Let's see, just a couple of other things to keep in mind. We've talked about this idea of being likable. You just want to be as respectful as you can. Again, like I had an experience where I turned down an offer and I was their number one they told me that they really wanted to hire me. And again, this woman was like, oh my gosh, we have to stay in touch. I was like, of course. It's how you handle yourself. We want them to like you as much as they like you now, right? So before you negotiate as well as after you negotiate. Right. So just like to think about, it's okay to advocate for yourself, but you have to do it in a way that is respectful. Because the thing is, they do like you. They want to hire you. They want you to join their team. You would not have an offer without them wanting to work with you. So you have that as leverage, but how you conduct yourself, right, in that negotiation is going to make a big impact, especially if you're negotiating with your future boss. That's something to keep in mind too. I think the other thing is sometimes I think people are kind of tempted to lie a little bit. So just keep that in mind that, like, I know sometimes you're like, oh, it's just a little lie. I think once you start with a little lie, I think sometimes those little lies kind of mushroom themselves. So just try to be as honest as you can. And also the other thing that's important, what value are you bringing? Are there languages that you speak? Are there certain software you know how to use? What qualities do you offer? Because that's going to help you as you negotiate, because you can say, well, based on my experience and my skills and X and Y, I believe blah, 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 blah. So that's something just for you to be able to think of what are some of the top skills and qualities that you offer. So I've been doing a lot of talking. I'd love to see if people have like just initial questions, and then we're going to show you some TikToks that have some great salary negotiation tips. Any like just initial questions as we're kind of continuing to move through the workshop?
I have a quick question.
Sure.
So in your opinion, what would you say is like the best way to like not look desperate?
Can
like
you
when you're
give
trying to
more?
negotiate a salary and you're trying not to seem too desperate, how do you like navigate that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I think I would say, like, are you saying you're desperate? Like, can you just, I'm sorry, can you say more about that?
So like you want a higher salary than what you're being offered, but you don't
Okay.
want to you don't want to make it seem like too extra, you know?
Okay, that makes
Okay.
sense. So I think, yeah, no, it's okay. I just was trying to make sure I understood. And again, we're gonna watch one that I think does a good job of that. But I think you can say again, like, thank you so much for this offer. I'm really interested. I'm very excited, to learn more. I'm excited to review the package. I did want to check in with you about what parts of the package are negotiable. So let's say, like, I don't know, let's say the salary they offer is $60,000, just as easy to think about. Like, I don't think, first of all, you want to do your research, right? But you also, if the salary they're offering you is 60 and you're like, yeah, so I want to make 90, right? Like, I think you want to keep yourself in a range that is realistic. If they're offering 60, they're probably not going to pay 90. Right. But I think also you want to be able to do your research and say, based on my skills or based on my market value, I've seen that, positions in similar companies are paying X, between X and Y, I'd be really excited to take this offer if the offer was increased to that, something like that, I think. But again, they want to hire you, but also it's okay to advocate for yourself, but you need to have something to say. Like, you can't just be like, listen, I want to make 90 because my rent payment is really expensive, or because I have a lot of student loans to pay back. Like, that's relevant for you, but the company, that's not relevant for the employer. So it needs to be based on like the skills, the qualities that you offer, and also based on the research that you're doing about what similar positions and companies are paying. So hopefully that helps a little bit, but we're about to go to the next slide. And just, again, everyone is different and there's no one right way to negotiate your salary, because again, the positions are different, you're different, what you offer is different. It's okay to feel kind of nervous about it, but also the practicing is important. Like, I've seen people, they'll like write out bullet points, I'll write out a script, however you want to do it, that's going to work for you. But I think if you don't practice it, that's the surest way, I think, to have not a great experience. So I think we are ready for one of the negotiation methods that we really like. And I will tell you, I spent a lot of time on TikTok looking up salary negotiation, and there's a lot of great stuff out there. There's also a lot, like Lauren said, a lot of not great stuff out there. So you need to be really asking yourself a lot of questions about, who is this person? What, are they have a credential? Are they a recruiter? Like, what do they know? Versus just like picking one that has a lot of likes or a lot of views. It doesn't mean it's a good, it actually is good. So sorry, I'll stop talking.
70 to 85% of employers are prepared to negotiate your salary. So here's the 3-part gratitude sandwich method that's successful in negotiating the salary you want because it is expected. This, my friends, is the best way to sound gracious, polite, but also firm and confident at the exact same time. Hi, my name's Emily. I'm a career and interview prep coach, and I've been using this method since I can remember to successfully negotiate the salaries that I want, as well as for my clients. I didn't really know it was called the gratitude sandwich method until I read a newsletter I'm subscribed to called The Assist, and it made sense. It just made sense. All right, so let's get to it. Remember, negotiations are not meant to be conflicts. They're meant to be collaborations. First part of the gratitude sandwich is supposed to show appreciation for everything else that you've experienced with the company before you start talking about money. Whether it's a video or a call, it should be somewhere along these lines. Oh wow, this is such great news. Thank you. I'm really excited for this opportunity. I felt so aligned and grounded in the interview, and I'm really looking forward to being a part of the team. Now this leads into the middle of the sandwich. Cater this to the reason why you deserve more money. In this case, I'll be saying it's less than what I was previously making. However, after going through the offer package in its entirety, I noticed that the salary was much less than what I was previously making, and I just want to make sure that I'm compensated fairly. Based on my skills, experience, and the market salary rate, it would make sense for me to be in a higher salary range, somewhere between X and Y. So if you were to increase the offer to somewhere in there, I would be eager to accept. Keeping it short and sweet and not rambling on is very, very important. It shows that you're prepared and that you just didn't decide to explain yourself. Finally, the close of the gratitude sandwich. And of course, I appreciate the consideration. Thank you so much once again for this incredible opportunity. I'm really looking forward to hearing from you. And if you need anything else from me in the meantime, please do not hesitate to let me know. If this helps you or you're going to use it, send me a quick follow for more videos on how to land a job as well as negotiate the salary that you want. Now get that bag.
So we've actually written out like kind of the directions from that TikTok, just so you have it. And again, we'll be sharing this with you, but I think hopefully that answers the question a little bit about being desperate. Like you want to be thankful, you want to be appreciative, and then you also want to ask for, whatever it is you think, is better or, a better fit. Then you also, again, want to be appreciative as you're sort of closing it out. And I think kind of put it in their lap and kind of see what kind of feedback you're going to get from that particular situation. And then we have another one that again is different. Like you will see there are just different ways of doing this that we liked as well.
I just offered a candidate $85,000 for a job that had a budget of $130,000. I offered her that because it's what she asked for, and I personally don't have the bandwidth to give lessons on salary negotiation. Let's go over how you do this again. When you're interviewed, inevitably the recruiter will say, how much do you want to make? I want you to pivot by saying, compensation's a pretty complicated topic and has a lot of different elements. Let's wait till we're a little further in the process before we talk specifics. However, would you mind confirming what the range of pay is to make sure that we're on the same page? When they share with you the range of pay, then you can respond by saying it's either low, high, or acceptable. And when you're left as the only one standing or one of two finalists, then you can really talk about compensation and you already know the range of pay, so you have a better starting point.
So that kind of follows with what we were saying about potentially earlier in the process, you might get asked, and we want to make sure that you're prepared. And I think this idea of kind of letting them know it's acceptable or, it's low or high or whatever, again, helps everyone to kind of be on the same page. And we also did kind of write out the steps as well, just because I think the video goes fast and it's nice to have the steps written out. And these are just different ways, right, of dealing with salary negotiation. There's 100 ways of it. But we want to just give you some different tips. Let's see. Lauren, did you want to show that one? I wanted to make sure if people have questions, and then we definitely have some time for questions, and we do have a brief survey that will take you 30 seconds. We would love to get you to fill out the survey, but we can show this one too. Yeah.
Pick up the phone, the recruiter says, hey, you got an offer, and the candidate accepts immediately. Don't do that. Number 2, don't tell them you're not interviewing anywhere else. Because the more options you have, the more leverage you have. You want to make them think that you have so many different companies that want you. And number 3, don't give them your bottom line. Why? Because you always want to shoot a little higher than you think you can get. Because once they hear a number, they can go a little below that. Good luck. 3 things you cannot do in a salary negotiation. Because if you do, you're leaving thousands of dollars on the table.
So questions that people have, again, we have some time. We're going to we can put the link in the chat. But yeah, we love questions that you have or things you're thinking about based on talking about our expectations about salary and also some different ways to negotiate.
I have another question actually.
Sure.
So if you're interviewing for an entry-level job, should you like move differently than if you were right? You should assess the situation differently, right? Like how specifically should you do that?
Yeah, I think I think that's a good point. I do think it's a little bit different to negotiate when you're entry level, like just out of college. But I think to Lauren's point, I think it depends a little bit on you and a little bit about your college experience, right? So for example, did you do an internship? Are there certain skills that you've developed as a college student or maybe outside of college that are relevant to the position? Right? Like you have a little bit, I would say a little bit like less leverage to negotiate than somebody who is maybe, 3 to 5 plus years of experience. But just because you're just graduating doesn't mean you can't negotiate. But I just think, again, I think sometimes people are like, oh, it offers 60, but I want 90. I'm like, okay, well, that may not be realistic unless you did a lot of research and the research showed you that 90 is really, the average for that kind of position. So yes, I think you have a little bit like less leverage as a recent graduate, but it would depend. If you did an internship while you're in college, or you did this other thing, or you have a skill that is relevant to the position, I think you can talk about that and say, you know, again, thank you so much for this wonderful offer. I'm you know, so excited to review and dig in a little bit more. I did want to touch base with you, you know, about the salary piece, because you know, that's important to me. And you know, I noticed that, you know, when I did my research, you know, the market is paying, you know, X, and I noticed, you know, this salary isn't within that range, based on my experience and the internships I completed in college, or, you know, I would like to get paid between X and Y. I think how she lays it out is pretty good, but it is a little bit different if you're a kind of somebody just graduating versus somebody who has more experience.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, good question. Other people, I see there's a robust discussion in the chat about that we can assist you with salary negotiation and practicing and those kinds of things. Okay. So let's see. Okay, Lauren did that. Okay, excellent. So let's see.